Today we've come together in our caucus to talk about building the infrastructure of America. This is so necessary for our country, and we will have our presentation to you momentarily. But first, I just want to say that in about an hour or so, the President of the United States will be signing the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. I want to say that what the President will be signing is quite different from what the President sent us. And because of the work of the House Democrats under the leadership of Richie Neal with his task force, and made tremendous differences in what was proposed originally and what the President will be signing today. I hope he understands what he's signing today. And it's about the differences in enforcement, about protecting American workers, protecting the environment, and the prescription drug piece of that. You have this. I'm not going to even read it or reference it more than I already have. But to say that because of the work of our chairman of our Ways and Means Committee and the work of organized labor, the AFL-CIO, and Richard Trumka, we were able to make vast improvements. If we weren't, we would not have been able to pass the bill. We would not even want it to pass the bill. But it passed with overwhelming support. And we want to do that for America's workers, America's farmers, America's economy. Just because he would be the person signing it would not be a reason why we would not do something good for the American people. I yield to the distinguished chairman.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. The only reason that the President is having this signing today is because of what we did as House Democrats. Just a reminder, you wrote about this for months. Rob Portman said this final agreement would have been something Barack Obama would have negotiated. Senator Toomey complained that it was too democratic and it had too many protections in there for labor rights. John Thune said this was too democratic. And today they're having a ceremony that if this original piece had been offered up to us that the President submitted, it would never have made its way out of the Ways and Means Committee. And recall that because it's a tax issue and a tariff issue, it originates in the Ways and Means Committee and in the House of Representatives. But we went to work on it with the task force that the Speaker and I assembled. We engaged in intense, sometimes fiery negotiations with the U.S. trade rep. And here's what we achieved. By any objective standard, stronger provisions for workers, sounder funding mechanisms to implement the labor and environmental positions, and a better enforcement mechanism than any trade deal in American history, and this is the largest one to date. And on top of all of that, we preserve Congress's right in terms of freedom to bring down drug pricing. If anybody said that at the beginning that we could get the AFL-CIO and the Teamsters to endorse this trade agreement, you would have all been very dubious. Instead, they did because of what we were able to build in to the agreement. Anyone who thinks that the President's proposal as originally submitted would have gotten out of the Ways and Means Committee, that's nonsense. It's possible that what they're signing today, I'm not even sure that some of them might even comprehend what they're signing. That's how far-reaching this is. But in the end, it was our priorities that made this happen. 193 Democrats in the House voted for the trade agreement. 192 Republicans voted for it. In the United States Senate, 90 members of the Senate voted for the trade agreement. My point is that they voted for it for one reason. It's because of how we shaped and altered the President's proposal that came up originally before the Ways and Means Committee and the task force had a chance to alter it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We invite somebody calling in the others. Thank you. Thank you. There we are. We started the morning with a session with the House Democratic Caucus to present infrastructure a piece, the start of our infrastructure initiatives for this Congress. Overwhelmingly, over 70%, 79% to 12, the American people said they want to see strong infrastructure, energy-efficient infrastructure, and the rest enacted as law of the land. A champion in all of that has been Peter DeFazio. This has been his life's work for over 30 years. We could not be better served by the knowledge, the vision, the experience that he has had, and the legislative virtuoso that he is. This is so important to America's working families, to everyone in our country. I'm especially proud that he brought with him today, that came with him today, people who have been a force in putting this together, a large number of freshmen who are assigned to the very coveted Transportation Committee. We'll also hear from Frank Pallone, whose Committee Energy and Commerce is a committee of jurisdiction in this piece, as well as Richie Neal, Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. All three of them we're very blessed by their leadership and service, especially on this particular issue. I do want to say that this is just one part of what we will be doing when we have our Legislative Week for Infrastructure. We'll also have a special focus on housing, a special focus on education, school construction, all of it very important to this. Perhaps something from the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Grijalva. This is a big step, though, and a major expense. We have to find the funding for it, and Richie will talk about that. But let me yield first with great appreciation and respect and admiration and gratitude to Chairman Peter DeFazio. Peter.
Thanks, Nancy. We have a tremendous opportunity here to do a transformative 21st century infrastructure package. We've been living off the legacy of Dwight David Eisenhower with small tweaks for 75 years. It's fallen apart. It needs to be rebuilt, and we can rebuild it in ways that are resilient for climate change, that use new and more climate-friendly materials that actually will be more durable. We can build a 100-year bridge. They have concrete now that can absorb carbon. We can provide new transit options, rail options for people. We want to enhance the inland waterways and do short sea shipping because we can move freight more efficiently on water than any other way that you can move freight. Our airports are overcrowded, and they need to be able to bond for needed improvements. But we also have to look at how we're going to provide renewable fuels to the airlines. That's part of this package. And the federal government really hasn't partnered with communities for more than half a century on wastewater. And I was inspired by testimony we took in the first hearing last year, or second hearing, on infrastructure by a sewer district in New Jersey that rebuilt their system with a federal loan, not a grant. And they were able to do it without raising rates because they're now capturing their methane and generating electricity. So we're going to have a new initiative in the area of wastewater where the federal government will partner. And if you partner with the federal government, you're going to collect your methane, generate your own electricity, and put extra electricity on the grid. There's so many ways we can deal with the climate crisis by solving our congestion and infrastructure crisis. And this today, we're moving forward. We've presented a framework. The framework, we're now drafting the details of that framework, and I'm looking forward to putting America on a sustainable path to a better transportation future.
Thank you. Let me thank Peter and our speaker for keeping this infrastructure initiative alive and constantly emphasizing how important it is, which is what we're doing today. And I also want to thank Peter for mentioning New Jersey as the innovation state. We're very proud of Thomas Edison and all the innovations that we've had over the years. But I just want to stress again that this infrastructure initiative is so important in terms of creating jobs and a strong economy and a growing economy, and also in addressing climate change. And as far as the Energy and Commerce's jurisdiction is concerned, both of those are true for the pieces that we're involved with. So I did want to mention first with regard to clean energy, this bill has major initiatives that will really encourage clean energy and address climate change. So we have about $34 billion for clean energy. A lot of that is for upgrading the electric grid to accommodate renewables and also make it more resilient. We have about $1.5 million to replace leaking gas pipelines. We also have major investments in energy efficiency, which is obviously so important. And also to develop electric vehicles, an electric vehicle charging network, if you will, across the country. Now, the second part within Energy and Commerce relates to broadband. There's $80 billion over 5 years. I think everything in the bill is over 5 years to fund deployment of high-speed broadband in underserved communities. So that's rural areas, that's urban, what we call urban broadband deserts. And we estimate, FCC actually did a study that said if we do this, then there'll be about 100% coverage for the internet for a broadband network around the country if we do this in underserved areas. Also, with regard to 911, the infrastructure for 911 needs to be upgraded. So we have about $12 billion for next generation 911 that allows you to basically use your cell phone, for example, to send text messages or images. That was particularly important in my state in the aftermath of Sandy. We had a lot of problems in terms of actual emergency communications. And then the last thing within our committee is we have, this is actually between both us and transportation. There's a major brownfields initiative, about $2.7 billion for brownfields, and then for safe drinking water, about $25 billion for safe drinking water, basically to fund the Safe Drinking Water Revolving Fund and also grants to municipalities and to state and local governments. So overall, this is a big win, if you will, for climate action and also to create jobs and to grow the economy. And with that, I would like to
Just a moment. First, we're going to go back to.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And then-
I neglected to introduce the members of my committee who have been real partners in this effort. And they brought a lot of knowledge to Congress, and they've been great to work with. Tom, we've got Representative Malinowski, Stanton from New Jersey, Stanton, Arizona, Mercosel Powell, Florida, Fletcher, Texas, Representative Davids from Kansas, Representative Garcia from Illinois, Chicago, and Representative Angie Craig from Minnesota.
Thanks. Well, the speaker said Peter was a virtuoso. Does that mean cantankerous? Peter and I have been going over this for a long period of time, back and forth on numbers here, and he's a really good negotiator, let me assure you of that. So, delighted to be here today. I've been in conversations with Secretary Mnuchin. Just before he left for Davos, we had a long conversation about how to proceed. Part of the conversation was based on what we did in, I think it was late November, early December at breakfast in the members' dining room, when the priority clearly was USMCA, but the suggestion was once that's done, we should move to infrastructure. The president volunteered a number at the White House of $2 trillion, if you recall, and I think that we're well on the way here to embracing many of the priorities that infrastructure would require: highways, roadways, bridges, airports, rail, water, and sewer. And I think that there's some room here where we might be able to find a bipartisan agreement. I think it's really important that we not volunteer a revenue stream until the administration reaches an agreement with us. And I think that that will provide an opportunity for Republicans and Democrats, after our committee negotiates with them over what the revenue stream ought to be, to get on with what is a sorely needed investment in America. Everybody across America, based upon the speaker's numbers today, in terms of polling, they all acknowledge what's happened. And anybody who has flown from Gate 35X, it even draws some humor from the reporters that are here today. It's something out of the third world. It's somebody blows the whistle and everybody takes off. And I've seen that everywhere that you travel. So there's a chance here to do this significant investment. And I want to cite one specific example of how we use stimulus money. It was the Springfield, Hartford, New Haven line, CT Rail. The investment came from Governors Patrick and Governor Malloy and now Governor Baker. And today it is far exceeded a 25% increase because of the double tracking that took place on the Connecticut side of the border. So there are all sorts of initiatives. I come from the mayor's office. I'm a believer. And one point that I want to make, I've seen during my time here, there's always this effort that the Republicans employ, and they call it dynamic scoring, which is always used to justify tax cuts. If you really want to use dynamic scoring, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, we should use dynamic scoring for infrastructure investment. You want to bump in economic growth, it will come from infrastructure investment, and coupled with the fact it's sorely needed. So thank you.
I'm always so glad to follow Mr. Neal. He says everything I wanted to say. I want to thank the speaker, and I want to thank all the committee chairs who are here, and I want to thank our new members who have brought a new energy and new focus because they just went through very tough campaigns, and they talked about what the people want, and they talked for the people. I started an agenda that I called Make It in America. Overwhelmingly supported by the American people, making things here in America. You make infrastructure all in America. And the Society of Engineers that Mr. Neal spoke of say there's a $4.5 trillion deficit in infrastructure investment in our country. And if we invest money in this country, creating American jobs, not only will we create those jobs, will we create, as Mr. Neal pointed out, dynamic scoring for a growth in the economy. And if we do not, we will not be competitive in the 21st century in the global economy. It's as simple as that. The cost of failure will far exceed the price of progress. Mr. Neal, the Speaker and I, and Mr. Clyburn, as well as Mr. DeFazio, met with the President. The President campaigned in 2016 on investing in infrastructure. He talked about $1 trillion. We met at the White House. He sent down a bill of $200 billion. The President of the United States said that bill was far insufficient. I don't like that bill, he said. That was the bill that he sent down, or the administration, somebody sent it down. He said it's not sufficient. And he came up, while we were talking $1 trillion, which is an awful lot of money, he said, no, that's not enough. We need to do $2 trillion. And Mr. Neal said, Mr. President, we'll talk to you about that, but we need your leadership. You tell us how you think that would be. We'll have a discussion about it, and let's move forward. At the end of the meeting, I said, Mr. President, you understand, no Democratic senator, no Republican senator, no Democratic House member, no Republican House member is going to support $2 trillion if you're not leading the way on how we raise that dollar. Mr. DeFazio, Mr. Pallone, and Mr. Neal have been working. But also, Mr. Scott is working on a bill that is absolutely essential. We need to help localities build educational facilities that themselves will be dynamically scored, because the more you do for education, the better your economy is. And one of the great problems we have in our country is homelessness and lack of affordable quality health care and housing for our people, for the people. So we're going to work on all of those. This we need to get done. And we are at a time of the lowest interest rates in history, or pretty close. Is that right, Reggie?
The President wants to go lower.
And the President wants to go lower on interest rates. What a perfect time to spend money at a very low cost on building our economy and creating jobs. So I thank all of those who are working on this effort. I thank all our new members who, I say, have brought that energy from Texas, from New Jersey, from Arizona, from Kansas, the center of our country, from Minnesota, and the senator from New Mexico. This is not political, I know that. We need to do this. Thank all of you for your leadership. And now I'll yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, a place that's getting a lot of attention nowadays, Jim Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. Let me join you in thanking all of the new members for their tremendous input on helping to make what DeFazio has for years been developing a very efficient program much more effective. And that's what this should be about. I think that if you were to look at the legislation and think about what's needed in the country, you are not going to have an effective school system, no matter how good the buildings are, unless you connect them, those schools, to the rest of the world. And that's what this legislation does. It puts in a significant investment in broadband, $86 billion over 5 years, will do two very important things. Number one, it will allow schools to effectively educate their children. You're not going to have adequate education unless broadband is used. Number two, it will allow health care to be delivered effectively. In my state, we've closed 4 rural hospitals recently, and rural hospitals all over the country are being closed. And the reason they're being closed is because they have not been able to effectively deliver health care because broadband deployment prevents that from taking place. And so I want to thank the committee for, all the committees, for all the work you're doing, for 2 of them at least. And I really want to thank Palone here. I'm a little bit surprised, Richard, that you let Palone get away with that innovation about New Jersey. In spite of Thomas Edison's work, he was not effective until he went up to Massachusetts and got Louis Latimer
Thank you,
to help him do that light bulb. And so that is an indication of why we should be working together, not just to be efficient with our work, but to be effective as well. And with that, I'll yield to the assistant leader, my good friend from New Mexico, Ben Ray Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everyone. And Madam Speaker, thank you for bringing us together here again. The work of Chairman DeFazio and Chairman Neal and Chairman Palone is critically important. We've talked about infrastructure for some time. I appreciate everything that I've learned from Chairman DeFazio as well, and the energy from the new members on the committees of jurisdiction. Who does not support an initiative to put more people to work across America, to modernize our infrastructure, to help people move a little more efficiently across roads and bridges, deliver water to communities that don't have it today, to help modernize those systems that have aged, to bring about a new way to treat wastewater across America as well. And you've heard a lot about broadband. What I appreciate about this package is it doesn't just make investments in the biggest cities in America, it includes the smallest towns and the rural reaches of places like New Mexico, where I call home. We all know the difference between fast internet, slow internet, and no internet. We know where our phones work and we know where they don't. Oftentimes in rural communities on a small farm, you know the fence post that you have to go find or the hill that you have to climb to try to even get some connectivity because of the lack of infrastructure and reach that exists. Too many kids that have to go and try to find a fast food restaurant in the neighboring town to sit in that parking lot just to try to do their homework. This package closes those gaps. It's not just about education and convenience and modernization and economic opportunity as well, though. Expanding broadband into rural communities will save people's lives. Too many Native American women go missing and murdered every day. Too many young Native men go missing and murdered every day in places where those phones don't work, where there's no connectivity, where you can't even find someone based on that signal. Modernizing 911 and expanding broadband across all parts of the country will save people's lives as well. This is a good bill. It's going to help the country. It's going to put people to work. And I look forward to being a part of getting this done. I now turn this back over to Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much, my colleagues, for your presentations and your commitment to this initiative that is about growth in America, creating jobs, educating the people, expanding health care, empowerment. I want to join my distinguished chairman of the Transportation Committee and acknowledging the participation of so many new members. I don't call them freshmen anymore because they're experienced legislators who have made such a tremendous difference, each in his or her own way. One of the issues that came up in our caucus this morning is how are we involving the mayors? Well, Mr. Neal is a mayor, and Mr. Stanton was a mayor, and infrastructure was a very important part of his leadership then and is now and will be part as we go forward. But when we talk about infrastructure and you address an American community, we have said to the community, everybody is going to be at the table as we go forward because everybody is affected by this, including our Native American community. So Congresswoman David's participation is very important. But all of the members of the committee, and we're especially invigorated by our new members. This is an issue that is about the quality of life, of getting people out of their cars, and that means also reducing pollutants in the air. So it's a health issue, a public health issue, clean air. It's an issue of commerce, moving product to market, whether it's about dredging the Mississippi or the Delta, whatever, or having more surface transportation. It's also about high-speed rail in some cases, but mass transit, again, to get people out of their cars, and to do so in an entrepreneurial, transformative way. And as I say, we couldn't be better served than by our chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Mr. DeFazio. So again, the broadband piece that Mr. Pallone talked about and Mr. Clyburn emphasized is very, very important. But I just want to make the point that this is a major thrust because it's the most costly, and we want to present it in a way that shows all the advantages of it as we go forward. But central to it is workforce development, and that is the education piece that will be part of our infrastructure week that the distinguished Mr. DeFazio suggested. Every day we'll have education, we'll have infrastructure, surface transportation, et cetera, infrastructure. We'll have broadband. We'll have housing. Housing absolutely essential and necessary right now. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, chair of the Financial Services Committee, has been working a long time thinking in an important way about the challenge to conscience that the housing issue presents to our country. And Congressman Bobby Scott has already developed his education bill, which will have a big announcement too. So I hope you'll join us for all of that. And Congressman Raul Grijalva, in terms of some of the natural resources issues that are will be affected by how we go forward with infrastructure. So every committee in the Congress has some piece of this because this has so much to do with everything that we do in the Congress. So I thank Chairman DeFazio. I thank Chairman Pallone. I thank Richie Neal. Richie, as I say, as a mayor, he talked about Massachusetts, but Build America bonds and how it affected so many projects in Middle America. So important. You mentioned the Las Vegas airport for one this morning, but many, many more, especially at a time, as Stenny said, of low interest rates. So thank you, Mr. Lujan, for your emphasis. Where'd he go? On the Native American community. Any questions for our chairman or our freshman? Yes, ma'am.
This question's for Congressman Neal. You said that you didn't want to volunteer a revenue stream until you had an agreement with the White House. What do you mean by that?
I think that when we went to the White House for the first meeting, I think everybody would say it was fine. The second meeting was not very good, but when we went in, the president was the one at the first meeting who volunteered the $2 trillion number. There was less agreement because there was no discussion about how to pay for it. And I think that what we're looking for here is an agreement that we can then take to the public between the two sides on how best to pay for it, so there's not one-upmanship. I'm told by one Republican leader he thinks that there could be up to 70 votes for an infrastructure bill in the House. And I think that there are a lot of things that we can do in some negotiation, and my hunch is that that's the best way to do it. But the Speaker said something that was really important because Alan Kruger and I worked on Build America bonds. Nothing in the Recovery Act was more successful in terms of public construction and infrastructure than the use of Build America bonds. So I want something that's really big, and I think Build America bonds ought to be a good place to start for all of us.
Just in that regard as well, the infrastructure legislation in the past has not been partisan at all. We've always been able to come together. So we feel in our campaign, we put forth for the people agenda. For the people, we would lower the cost of health care by lowering the cost of prescription drugs, and we have introduced H.R. 3 to do just that. In the campaign, the president said he was going to negotiate like crazy, and we hope that like crazy means to really sincerely negotiate for lower prices. That's the most important way to bring it down. We also said we're going to lower healthcare costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs. We're going to build the infrastructure of America. We're going to build bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America. That's what we're here to do. The president said throughout the campaign that's something that he wanted to do. So we hope to be joining with him in a unifying way, not a dividing way, in a unifying way about how we go forward together. And that's what this is, moving forward framework for the people. We also said we were going to have cleaner government. I don't know if he's up for that, but at least in lowering drug prices and building the infrastructure of America, we think that we have, we're hopeful about finding common ground. But as I say, the infrastructure issue has never been partisan in our history in the Congress. Yes, sir.
You said that you would have an infrastructure week at some point.
Yes.
When do you intend to put this on the floor, and will you wait for an agreement with the president on revenue before you start moving this legislation?
The Ways and Means Committee has their hearing this afternoon, starting at 1:30, and we've got witnesses from across the economic spectrum that's going to speak to the issue of infrastructure and how broad it ought to be and how big it ought to be. So the private sector, based on increases in productivity, greater efficiencies and all, they're all in on this, but I think we kick it off again this afternoon at 1:30.
But as far as on the floor,
When we're ready. We'll go to the floor when we're ready. That is the answer that I give you all the time. We wanted to have that week where we have housing and education, as well as surface transportation, broadband, all the elements that you heard about today. And when we go, we'll be ready, and it's going to be pretty exciting for our country. And we're very, we're again, would be sending legislation over to the Senate. We would hope that would have better prospects than the 275 bipartisan bills that we have sent to the Senate, which have been ignored by the Grim Reaper. It's funny to me to hear them say, why are we doing this impeachment? We should be doing the people's business. Yes, you should have been doing it for the past year because you've had plenty of legislation to pass, starting with protecting our children with gun violence protection. Yes, sir.
Madam Speaker, do you anticipate, would you like to go for a big package of $760 billion or smaller pieces, surface transportation and so on?
Well, traditionally, surface transportation, since Dwight David Eisenhower, has been paid for with user fees. I would hope there'd be some combination of user fees and bonding, as Richie mentioned. And I mean, it's abysmally stupid to not borrow money. The Treasury can borrow money a little over 2%, and we can build bridges that'll last 100 years. And we're going to score that as a one-year expenditure? No. I mean, we need to look at this like a capital investment in the United States of America. So that's surface. Harbors, we've already paid for them. We already passed a bill by more than two-thirds majority out of the House to spend the money we've taken from the American people to invest in our harbors, and because we have a huge backlog there. We will reiterate that yet again in this package since the Senate hasn't taken up that individual bill. Then airports haven't been allowed to increase their passenger facility charge since 2001. Many of them are totally over capacity. If we expand capacity, we can bring in new competition, lower prices, and that's why the airlines are really opposed to increasing the passenger facility charges. They say, oh, don't worry, if we raise bag fees $20, you're going to thank us, but if you pay another $1 to have a better airport experience or new entrants that'll lower ticket prices, you'll never fly again. Yeah, what a bunch of BS that is. So that's part of this package. So I've got, we're doing the first reauthorization of the SRF fund, the federal, state revolving fund for wastewater since back in 1987. So these are, traditional things that we've done out of this committee historically, and they have been paid for, and they yield benefits for decades to come.
Yes, ma'am. One last question.
I just wanted to ask, again about the floor plan, whether you plan to move these together, what you think, some bills have already moved, but kind of what you think would be the order if they don't move together, and then kind of where, I'm a little confused about how schools, housing, and parks fit into all of it.
Well, they fit in very directly because an educated workforce is essential to building the infrastructure of America. And they tasking for what is needed in terms of building, in terms of the education of the American people. But when we are ready, we'll come to the floor, and we will come to the floor when we have as much specificity as possible, and hopefully bipartisanship. And these are not message bills. We are hoping that we will have the support of the Republicans and the President of the United States. We had hoped that all along with 275 bipartisan bills that we sent to the Senate. But don't worry about the timetable. Just rest assured that when we're ready, we'll come to the floor. And it won't be soon. We're not talking about next week or something. The committees are working their way, and when we're ready, we'll bring it to the floor. We'll see.
One point of clarification, the 760 billion, though, that does not include the schools and the parks.
No, that's different.
additional, though.
This is just for the package that you are seeing today. When the president talked about $2 trillion, the 750 is 750 over 5 years. So double that for 10 years, because that's how we have to budget here. So that's what, $1.5 trillion. That still leaves $1 trillion for further investments in these initiatives, but also into education and housing. And affordable housing, in terms of proximity, is so important to the growth of our economy. It's a challenge to our conscience to have affordability in housing, but it's also a practical matter that people should be able to live closer to work so that, again, they're out of their cars. My colleagues, thank you, Mr. DeFazio, Mr. Pallone, Mr. Neal, to our newest members of Congress for their leadership and their invigoration to this process that they have brought. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. New Jersey got off.